The last regular season road game is in the rearview mirror. Ohio State is officially in the championship home stretch now. Easy for me to say. Welcome to the podcast daily. It is a Boren Blitz. That is Zach Boren. I am Austin Ward. Buckeyes win 31-7 over Northwestern at Wrigley Field. First of all, welcome back from the Windy City. Zach, what'd you think?
Thanks, man. We fun experience pregame, very fun experience entering the stadium. Game watching experience, not the greatest. Okay. Now, would I ever turn down going to Wrigley again for an Ohio State football game? No. Did I learn my lesson of like the very select few seats that you can probably have that's enjoyable to watch this game? Yes. And that's where I would be sitting. But hey, listen, we got in there, got out. The talk leading up to that game was players are more prone to injury there because of the right field wall, where on third base the stands jet out, which was one corner of the end zone. Buckeyes came out clean, healthy, so we're happy about that.
Yeah, we'll be paying attention to some injury, though, because I think let's just start right there. We have a ton to get into with two high-stakes games left in the regular season. Indiana top 5 matchup on Saturday. We all know what's happening the week after that with the game, and then the potential for Oregon in the Big Ten championship game if the Buckeyes handle the next 2 weeks. Indiana is going to be a big test, and you want to have Jeremiah Smith fully healthy. And the turf had nothing to do with him leaving with a huge bag of ice on his ankle. I don't know if you watched it over a bunch of times like I did, Zach. Looks like a dirty play, and if that impacts Ohio State moving forward, I don't even know what they could do. I'm sure Ohio State will send that to the Big Ten office and say, is this a violation of the sportsmanship policy? Is there anything you can do? It won't matter. Like if Jeremiah Smith is not 100% on Saturday because of that play, that would be infuriating.
Yes, I've seen the replay multiple times. I'm not going to touch on that because to your point, it's very much of Ohio State's going to send it into the Big Ten. They will rule on it. It has no it doesn't matter at all what that ruling is moving forward for the Buckeyes. This is why I'm very optimistic. It's because once that happened, Jeremiah Smith came back into the game, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's not like that happened and he was out the rest of the game with ice on his ankle. Looks like maybe a minor sprain, obviously with the way he was twisting it. Who knows what the exact injury is. For him to come back and almost look like he didn't miss a beat from that standpoint, obviously you're going to put ice on it afterwards. They're going to do treatment this week. The way I would take it is Buckeye fans should not be worried about that. Now, I don't have any inside knowledge whatsoever, but just knowing the game, knowing the way the Ohio State team docs are, the way Coach Day and his coaching staff would be if it was something serious, especially putting Jeremiah Smith back into the game. Mm-hmm. I think Buckeye fans don't have anything to worry about. And if I know Jeremiah Smith like we do, that dude is as competitive as it gets, and that dude is going to be out there Saturday and dominating.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. He's the headliner, though. He's become one of the most famous players and most impactful players in college football. So when he gets a little bit banged up and you have a matchup like Indiana looming, I feel like we have to start there. But let's zoom back out because I zoomed too far into one specific thing.
Let me zoom in on one something with Jeremiah Smith, though. I'm still not, and I know you have difference of opinion. I am still not completely sold that his touchdown or supposed touchdown catch, the ball actually hit the ground. Like, was it moving? Yes. But from angles I have seen, and I know I'll section with you during the game, It still looks like his arm and forearm are somewhat under the football.
That might have been the only clear vantage point you had of anything on the field.
Oh, no doubt. It happened right in front of me. Right in front of me. Like that when that went to replay, I'm like, no, that's a catch. For sure that's a catch, right? Especially when he obviously is going down, but I thought his forearm was still there. And then he obviously goes to his back and is catching the football. I have a little bit of different opinion on you with you than that. I didn't think there was enough to overturn it, but
I did. I was surprised that they overturned it. And, I was watching the replays in the press box and I could see like where it looks like the ball is rotating. I do agree with what you're saying. And maybe the replay officials just don't recognize that Jeremiah Smith is an alien and he could have controlled it the whole way through and his body was turning. I'm surprised it was overturned. I do agree with you, but I thought on Saturday in the moment. I'm like, maybe they're right.
It's one of those calls. I firmly believe it's one of those calls. If it was ruled incomplete on the field, it's incomplete. If it's ruled a catch, it's a catch. Like, it's one of those that is so 50-50, even with replay, when you slow it down, that at that point you have to stick to what the call was on the field, right? And so that's where I'm like, I just don't understand that. Sorry, we'll zoom back out. I had to zoom in on one other thing with Jeremiah Smith.
No, I'm glad you did, because it's another thing. We haven't had a good reason to criticize the officials in a while. So I want to make sure that you have that full passion going till we get into this conversation. When we've talked about like Ohio State energy, passion, intensity, I don't know that Saturday was the best example of that from the last few weeks. Ryan Day called it workmanlike, and I think that's true. But I also was out there, was on the field during pregame warmups, and there was I think they were enjoying this moment. And they knew Northwestern was never really going to pose a serious threat, whether this was coaches, whether this was, Will Howard making jokes and smiling. I thought Ohio State was very loose for this game, and then approached it in a way that was like buttoned up and get out of town as fast as possible. So I'm not reading too much into that. No, either way, I do agree with the workmanlike approach, but also that this team still made the most of a unique opportunity and didn't exert itself 110% knowing what's coming.
No, I totally agree with that. I think the workman's like approach that Ryan talked about is very spot on. Now, do I love the start to the game, and could I thought have been faster? Yes, for sure. I think every Buckeye fan can point to that. Going down 7-0 to Northwestern, I think there was just kind of some groans in the stadium. You could tell, just like people like, let's go, let's turn it on. But to your point, it was a completely different atmosphere than what Ohio State has ever been used to. I would argue 90% of the stadium was Ohio State fans, right? So, like you said, guys felt loose. It almost felt like a little bit, and don't take this the wrong way, it almost felt like an exhibition game, right? Like, you know how the NFL does like some preseason games and guys just seem relaxed and you're doing some different things? That's exactly what it felt like on Saturday. It was an exhibition game. Now, Buckeyes finally took care of business, 31-7. You'll never complain about that. But throughout the past couple of years, and especially early on this year, there was always talk about Buckeyes starting slow. And so obviously that topic gets brought up again, and you want to lay that to rest. So, hey, listen, if you start slow, there's no way you can start slow the next 2, possibly 3 weeks, because if you do, you're in a world of hurt. So they need to make sure that, hey, listen, that game happened. It's Northwestern, like to your point, they never thought they would actually be a threat, which I totally understand that. But you have to change that mindset around now that, hey, guess what? These noon kicks come quick. I know they talk about having a routine, but you're having noon kicks the next 2 weeks. You have to come out throwing punches early.
Yeah, and I guess as I'm getting ready for the week ahead and thinking about Saturday with Indiana, much more so than Ohio State, Northwestern. And we can nitpick details all we want. And I think if this game had happened in like week 2 or 3 and back in September, maybe that's what you and I would be doing, because we're speculating, well, you couldn't let this happen all year long. Like, you were going to have to learn from these things and fix them. We've already, for the most part, seen Ohio State do that. We know what they look like at their full potential. And Indiana's going to have their attention, and being in the Horseshoe and knowing that you cannot lose if you're going to get to Indianapolis, that this is an elimination game for the Big Ten championship. Like, knowing that, I would be very surprised if they didn't treat it with a largely different sense of urgency than what we saw Saturday. I understand it. It's human nature. And the exhibition point, like, they're playing at Wrigley Field. Like, a lot of those things did make it feel that way. I would be very stunned if they duplicated that sort of like early sluggish start on Saturday.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and we've talked about it on this show. When you get into late October, November, especially playing in some big games, and then you're playing a conference opponent who's towards the bottom of the standings, whether it be on the home or at home or on the road, it's tough because it's hard to be motivated at that point, right? Early on the season, you already talked about it. Hey, listen, early on, our piss is still hot, right? Like, we're trying to figure out who we are. We're still super excited to go out and play the game of football. Not that they're not excited now, but now guess what? You start talking about, okay, our position, and you start circling those big games. You start looking at, oh man, okay, we're in the Big Ten championship. We got our eyes on the Big Ten championship in Indy. And so when you're playing some of these lower end Big Ten teams, it's hard to get motivated and go out and do it. So we could nitpick all day, but to go out there and win 31-7, there's no complaints there, right? There's no complaints at all. I think if you would have won 31-7 against Purdue, there shouldn't have been any complaints, but you won 45-0, So, knowing that Indiana's coming up, which is College game day, top 5 matchup, knowing that Michigan's after that, and we all know it doesn't matter what Michigan's record is, doesn't matter what they've done up to this point in the season. The Buckeyes have that game circled, and they want some blood.
I don't want to make it seem like you or that you and I are just waving our hands and dismissing what happened on Saturday. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Like, whatever they did wrong, they'll automatically fix it against Indiana. Like, and we talked about this even a week ago with Purdue and the jack position and 3-man fronts and, the drives not being perfect. Of course, the coaching staff is going to find things that happen on Saturday and use them as coaching points. But I feel like analyzing it from the outside, I didn't see anything that was new or overly concerning. You said 31-7. Yes, Ohio State could have scored more. They could have executed the passing game better. I think there were even plays when Quinshon was bulldozing guys at times and looked unstoppable. He made a couple reads, and didn't hit the hole properly. And, so Ohio State did not execute perfectly on offense. They let had a couple drives on defense that let Northwestern go down the field more than you would ideally like. And we could spend time talking about that if we want to. And I'm not trying to completely gloss them over, but it wasn't like there was some new thing that dramatically changed Ohio State. I just think it was a product of the circumstance more than anything else.
Yeah, you hit on all great bullet points. I would also argue, though, being at a lot of games this year, I would say Saturday were some of the best throws I've seen Will Howard make all year. You talk about the pass to G. Scott going down the middle of the field.
Man.
Oh my God, in the bucket. Jeremiah Smith's touchdown, that I think's the touchdown, right? Early on in the game, thrown perfectly. I would even see a Carnell Tate's touchdown throw, right, where he dove for the ball. I think it was an amazing throw, right? He put some air under it, let Carnell go get it. So some of those throws I thought were maybe Will's best throws of the year. But yes, to your point, defense had some drives, especially early on in the game. They, Jack Sawyer ended up getting a strip there that, David IGB ended up getting it in a turnover. Honestly, it's just super weird when you start talking about these games because it's like you could nitpick so many things that are like such small things, but they added up to just a big feeling. And that's what I call it. It's not like glaring on film. It's not like you're going to leave this game being super pissed off as a fan or as a player or as a coach. Like, you shouldn't be pissed off. It's one of those downright just boring games, right? Like, there were no huge flashes like, oh my God, there was no like pure dominance throughout the entire game with explosive plays here and there. It was just kind of a ho-hum beating that Ohio State put on a team that could have been way worse than what it was. But it goes back to saying, hey, listen, you're in the middle of November. There are some massive games still on the schedule coming up, and they go on the road and beat a team 31-7. Like, yeah, you can't complain about that.
No, and I think that you can look at it either way. I've been calling this season sort of your choose your own adventure. They had this 2-week stretch against Purdue and Northwestern. They could use it to get healthy. They could use it to experiment with some scheme and personnel. They did that. You look at the negative. If that's the route you want to go, you want to walk down that path. You say, well, they're not playing with the same full sense of urgency, intensity, and toughness that they did at Penn State. Well, they didn't play Penn State the last 2 weeks. And if that game had been further removed, if it wasn't just 2 weeks ago, I would say, can Ohio State get that back? Are they able to take their game to another level? I'm going to go down whatever, let's call this the path to the left, the optimism, the glass half full side. I think they knew all along. And you heard Ryan Day, we talked about the way he turned Purdue into a huge test, and you had to treat them very seriously. I think they navigated these 2 weeks in a productive way, knowing that they were never going to be seriously threatened to lose, because you also do have to keep some powder dry for what's coming here with Indiana. And Indiana's performance against Michigan, I think we'll talk about that plenty in the week ahead. Raise some questions about the Hoosiers. Set aside the game. The game is its own thing. If you have a top 5 game and you know that it's going to be more challenging than Purdue and Northwestern, you're just going to have to get through it the best you can. And I think that the coaching staff and the players, the training staff, like everybody involved, I honestly believe that they did that. You said this last week when I was talking about, they could have won by more. And you said, well, they won by 45. Yeah, that's pretty good. They could have won by more on the road against Northwestern. Well, they won by 24 and the game was never seriously close once they, got rolling in the second quarter there. I think that they got exactly what they needed out of these 2 weeks. That's me. And I think you agree.
No, I would totally agree. And what I also love, and people might say, hey, you're being very positive about this, but it's true, is that you want to be playing your best football at the end of the year, right? The last couple weeks in November, especially going into conference championship season, bowl season, now playoff season, you want to be playing your best football. And I would argue Ohio State hasn't played their best game yet this year, right? Like you talk about Penn State. In Penn State, I was at the game. The intensity was there. It was crazy. But I'd also argue they executed terribly against Penn State, especially on the offensive side of the football, right? Like they could have beaten Penn State by 21 or 28, right? If they would have connected on some third downs early on, if they would have connected on some deep balls that we saw with Carnell and Jeremiah, like the list goes on and on they could have executed so much better. We talk about Oregon. Like Oregon played a perfect game against Ohio State, and Ohio State did not play them well. Didn't get one sack on Dylan Gabriel, turned the ball over twice, had some costly penalties. Like they haven't played a complete game. And you look across the country, and that's what, the college football committee, that's what the media is talking about now, is like, who's playing the best football? No one cares about what happened 6 weeks ago. No one cares about, what your ranking was at the beginning of the year. It's how are you playing at the end of the year? And I would argue, you look at a team like Oregon, played great football at the beginning of the year, right? I would say they almost hit their peak against Ohio State. And you've seen the past couple of weeks, I don't believe they're the same Oregon that played Ohio State, right? Look at what they did Saturday against Wisconsin. Camp Randall is a very hard place to play. So I'm not I'm not slighting them at all for that victory, but putting up only 16 points. They didn't execute great on offense at all, right? But Wisconsin, trust me, they do not have a glorious offense either, right?
So sure don't.
You talk about all these things, and I would argue like Ohio State's best game has yet to come. Maybe we're going to see it against Indiana. Maybe we're going to see it against Michigan, right? But you start firing and you start building that thing up, and you're playing your best football at the end of the year. I think Ryan Day and this coaching staff would take that all day long rather than saying, oh man, listen, we were executing at an all-time high against Oregon, and now we're kind of puttering out. We're trying to get it back. Like this team has continued to take steps where like after every game, it doesn't matter what kind of victory it is against who, we're always like, well, they could have done this better. Well, they could have done that, right? And I think that's a good thing because now you start putting those things together at the end of the year. That's when you can go on a special run.
Yeah, I mean, no one would want to get to the end of the year and say, well, Ohio State's best performances were against Northwestern and Purdue. Like that, right. That's not what you're looking for. That's not going to win you a championship. And the Buckeyes are at that point now, Zach, with what the stakes are. There's nothing but high stakes games ahead. Like every single game that is left, and there could be a lot of them, are going to have something meaningful attached to it. And I think
look at the 2014 team. Right, I would say this, the last team that won a national championship, they obviously played terribly in the beginning of the year against Virginia Tech. Then if you remember, right, they kind of sputtered through the middle of the year, just kind of ho-hummed, right? And then remember against Michigan, they absolutely smacked them at home. I remember Zeke just went off. Then you go against Wisconsin, and it's like 59-0, and no one saw that. And you're like, oh my God, who is this team, right? They just found something. They started executing. They started doing all those things that they were missing. And just, it's like the ignition's kind of revving, and then finally it turns over, right? And the ignition starts. And so you saw that at 2014. I think there's a very good chance you see this with this 24 team as well.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking 2014, this was right around the time where they went up to Minnesota and messed around a little bit, and I believe wound up winning that game just by 7. It wasn't some nonstop dramatic improvement week over week over week, because that's not the way life works. That's not reality. So, this team had a lot of soul searching to do after Oregon, and we've talked about that over and over and over. We saw the dramatic improvements from the toughness of that team on both sides of the football at Penn State a couple of weeks ago. And as you mentioned, they didn't execute perfectly. Once you put all those pieces together, and again, we won't be able to sit here on a Boren Blitz next Monday, and if they don't do it and don't win that game, like, justify it. It'll be too late then. Like, it'll be a fresh new batch of questions. So everybody knows, and that's going to be the way it is moving forward. If you don't beat Indiana, Michigan, of course, the rivalry and its stakes are separate, but the Big Ten championship will elude this team. They have to win on Saturday. Given the current losing streak against Michigan, that's not a game that anyone would ever say you could lose. So that's still going to have Big Ten championship stakes attached to them. So you avoid the tiebreaker. Then you have Oregon, and then you have whatever the situation is after that in the playoff. Like, this is it now. When they have said the last few weeks they are in the playoff, it's easy to kind of laugh a little bit and brush that off because it's Purdue and Northwestern. They're not going to beat them, but that is true now. So that mentality, like, that's a different level of pressure. And I think, Zach, it's going to be interesting to see how this team responds to that, because it's been building towards this all year.
Yeah, you talk about these next couple games, and you're spot on. Like, Indiana is going to come in. Doesn't matter whether they're playing Ohio State or whoever, and it doesn't matter that they know they haven't beaten Ohio State in a very long time. With the way Coach Cignetti is at Indiana, they are going to come in confident. They're going to come in flying high. They're going to come in with literally nothing to lose. And Indiana's going to play like they can beat Ohio State. That's what they will, because the head coach of that team is going to make sure that message is drained into the Indiana players' head. So if you're Ohio State, you can't take that lightly. To your point, the playoff starts now for them, right? Like, these are huge games. If you go through and execute, you brought up different things that they've shown. Like, Ohio State can be very explosive on offense with deep balls and doing those things. They can be very nasty and physical and grind things out like we saw at Penn State in the run game. They can play tenacious defense and get after you and create turnovers. We've seen it. They just haven't really done all those things in the same game before, right? And so you're starting to see those things. If you start taking that off, or you start taking off and showing those things, and Indiana's going to be a great test, especially with the mindset that they're coming in. They're going to come in wanting to fight, right? I think Ohio State knows that, and this coaching staff knows that. But even after that, Michigan's going to come in here the same way, right? And I already touched on it. Doesn't matter what Michigan's record is. They're going to come in saying, we've beat you the last 3 years. We can out-physical you. We can do all those things that we've done the past couple of years, and we can beat you. Because guess what? We want to ruin your season. We are going to win you. There's a lot of those guys on that team who have never lost to Ohio State, right? You think about it. They didn't play in 20, and now 21 through 22, 23, they beat them. So there are guys who are going to have a ton of confidence. And when a team has confidence, doesn't matter. You throw everything out the window. They are going to come in there and be ready to play. And then you talk about Oregon again, obviously. Ohio State needs to win these next 2 games, but you play against Oregon. That is going to be an absolute showdown. And against that team, you got to show them, like, hey, listen, we can be physical, because we weren't as physical. We talked about that as we were against Penn State, so to speak. We didn't have a ton of explosive passing plays, right? You need to see that. In defense, guess what? Oregon probably saw Ohio State's worst defensive performance this year with the inability to get after the quarterback, missed tackles, missed assignments, right? So it's like there is so much to prove. This Ohio State has so much to prove in that game, but you need to get there.
Yep. And it's about to be really fun starting Saturday noon in the Horseshoe against Indiana, but we got to close the books on Northwestern and the trip to Wrigley. So Zach was there from his vantage point. He's got us a 3 and out, the 3 stars. I'm going to guess that the hometown hero is number 1.
You hit the nail on the head. I'm not even giving anyone any other awards. It's Carnell Tate, and Carnell Tate, 1, 2, and 3, right? What he's went through, I don't think people truly realize.
Special, man.
How hard that is, especially right before you're starting your freshman football season as true freshman. You're in college, you're leaving home, to be able to deal with that and then be as successful as he's been. And we talk about it all the time. Carnell Tate is so talented, but he rides under the radar because of, last year was Marvin and Emeka, right? And people were like, oh my God, this Carnell Tate guy is going to be, should be the number 3 receiver, but he didn't give as much attention. Now this year, where he should be getting a bunch of attention, it's a Mecca and Jeremiah, right? And it's like, this guy is so talented and does so much for this team, but rides under the radar. And so no one gives him as much credit, kudos for what he's able to bring to this offense and how big of a talent he is. So for him to go out back home for the very first time, deal with all those emotions of losing his mom really just over a year ago, right? Yep. And be able to channel that and put in that kind of performance, 2 touchdown catches, a career day for him from that standpoint. He should get all of the focus of our show. All Buckeye fans should just give him tons of love on social media. They should reach out, get behind him because he deserves every bit of it. And I would also say that, hey, listen, you want to talk about playing your best football, this might be that game. And then I talk about Carnell riding on the radar, but this might be that game where he becomes a star. You know what I'm saying? And I know Jeremiah and Mecca are already our stars, but this might be that game where, hey, listen, 2 touchdowns going back home, playing for your mom. Now you go out in some other massive games. Like, he might be that guy. And, you think about some of the past receivers like, Johnny Dixon, Terry McLaurin, who weren't real stars. And then as they kind of got older, they had that performance and just took them off. This could be one of those games for him.
Yeah, even outside of the 2 touchdowns, he had that really tough catch down there in traffic in the red zone. Avoiding 2 defenders and coming up with that grab. So great game for Carnell Tate, and it was special. It was memorable, I think, for everybody to see. His friends and family. I think it was 27 tickets that he had, and Ryan Day and Brian Hartline, the coaching staff, just like everybody was so emotional about that. Carnell didn't show a ton of it when he was talking after the game, but you could see how much it meant to everyone in the program that he was able to do that. And sometimes those moments too can have a carryover effect for players and for programs. And we'll see if that does, because the stakes are going up again on Saturday. Ohio State and Indiana, a top 5 matchup. I'm still not used to saying it, but that's what it is. It's one of the most
college
important
game day,
games.
baby.
It's all happening. So we're going to get ready for it all week long right here on the Podcast Daily. Thanks, as always, to Zach Boren for kicking it off with us with a little Boren Blitz. I'm Austin Ward. Hey, it's going to be a fun week, folks. Stay with us. We'll talk to you later.